Gods, heroes, and groups. There's so much to talk about tonight, and there's so much to ponder and question. This is a very interesting talk that Adon and Brandt will be sharing with us today about using mythic archetypes to understand group and organizational dynamics. We have the honor of hosting you, Brandt and Adon. And I will briefly present our two speakers for the evening or morning, depending on where you're joining us from. So I'll start with Brandt. Brandt Elwood has an MA in Social Organizational Psychology from Columbia University and is the executive director for a therapeutic recovery program for adult men. During the pandemic, he directed a nonprofit that utilized myth and archetypal theory to conduct rites of passage work with young men in the Southeast U.S. Before that, Brandt worked with multiple wilderness therapy organizations in a leadership role. Brandt draws from the mythopoetic lineage of Robert Bly, Robert Johnson, and others in an attempt to establish a novel style of thinking about groups and communities and organizations. He first attended a Tavistock-style group relations conference in 2015. Aidan Moran has one foot in psychology and the other in technology. A student of group relations since 2019, Adon has attended multiple group relations style conferences in member, trainee consultant, and staff roles, including the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations Leicester Conference. Adon draws on Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, Jonathan Pajot, René Girard, Simon Western, and others in his explorations of individual and group dynamics. Adon is particularly interested in the intersection of psychology, mythology, and religion, and how these areas can inform our understanding of individuals and group behavior. So once again, welcome and a huge hello to Brandt and Adon. And I would just want to let everyone know, please, you can leave your comments in the chat box. And later on during the Q&A session, you might also want to use the mic. So raise the virtual hand or the real hand on the screen, and we will call onto you and ask you to speak. So without further ado, Brandt and Adon, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. Thanks for having us on. I'm Brandt. Adon is in here somewhere.
Yes, there I am.
Yeah. Well, I made sure to wear the same shirt as in my bio picture, so there's no confusion. So just a quick kind of background. There's both Adon and I have done extensive work in the Tavistock tradition around group relations conferences. I'm not sure how many folks here have done some of that. There's definitely a lot of overlap with Jungian thinking, in my mind, at least, drawing a lot from Kleinian ideas. One of the assumptions that we make of this audience is that there's some familiarity around the Kleinian concepts of projection and projective identification, and how this idea of giving away painful parts of ourself to the other as a means of learned protection and coping with anxiety. So we're not going to, sit on that and lecture on that piece as much. This is more of an extension, and honestly, probably I would say one of the difficult parts of designing any sort of elevator pitch around this work is the fact that it's not a 101 kind of class. We're looking at taking some of these concepts, which are tough to wrestle with in their own right, and then applying them to groups and getting more and more nuanced and curious with them.
And that's the same with the group relations theory. That's a whole field in itself. So yeah, I don't think we'll go down the rabbit hole tonight, but we can pass on some papers to Rula for those who are so inclined.
Yeah, and I think we touched briefly on some of the stuff like Wilfred Bion's ideas that maybe aren't as ubiquitously known and talked about in psychodynamic circles as much, but are big pieces of understanding group relations work.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I'll also say, feel free to use the chat function to throw questions in. I think Adon and I decided that we're going to work through the material and then create some space for some questions, and then potentially look at doing some breakout work. But if you have a question, And if you're like me, holding on to a question often just means forgetting it and feeling like you didn't get to ask it. I don't want that to be the case. So feel free to throw that in the chat, and Adon and I can check on that as we go.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You want to go for the wilderness?
Yeah, let's dive in. So I'll try to keep the story relatively short, because it's like a little bit of my background, but it's a crucial piece of how I got into this work, and how Adon and I ended up deciding to collaborate and build this out. In 2011 through 2015, I did the math. I did about 10,000 waking hours as a wilderness therapy guide, working with troubled teens, or whatever word you want to use. That's kind of a charged term in the US these days, but working with adolescents who are dealing with mental health concerns where their home environment is no longer safe. And so these are groups of usually 6 to 10 adolescents with 3 to 4 staff that are highly trained, immersive. It's an immersive environment with lots of relational therapy skills, lots of CBT, and a lot of just resilience training around us, like mentorship model, staff helping students kind of work through the therapy plan that the therapist put forward, but also just dealing with being in the wilderness, which is like drastically different from sitting in mom's basement eating Cheetos and spending 23 hours gaming, which would be the type of client we might see back in the day. I was in my young 20s doing this work. I had gone and done an undergrad in psychology and thought that must mean I know something about psychology. And I just ended up having my mind blown very quickly by how intense it is to work with that clientele. And also just the beautiful nature of the work when transformation does happen, watching somebody come in who's despondent, feels like they have no inner resources to deal with stress, hopeless, has just stacked maladaptive coping mechanisms to where it's hard to even distinguish what's what and like get in there to start to help a student. And watching through the power of the group and the milieu that was created there, these transformations happen in a matter of 2 to 3 months. It absolutely blew my mind. I was really tempted to go the therapist route, and then another piece connected with me that really sunk in was around the mentorship milieu that was created in that specific organization at that time. This idea that there's a group zeitgeist that's a healing factor in both the staff teams and the group milieu, where a key member leaves, either a staff team moves on to another job opportunity, or a student who's taken a leadership role and really mentored their peers leaves the milieu. And my thinking at the time was that's going to create a massive hole. Things aren't going to be the same. What I saw was that other folks the group was this intelligent, amorphous thing that would adapt and recreate that culture, and people would step into different roles. And I found that really fascinating. The one story that I remember that I think illustrates the power of the group and sent me on this path of studying organizational psychology specifically was working with a relatively functional group of adolescent boys in the woods. And there was one kid who was completely shut down. And for days, the group would get ready to hike, would pack up all their gear, and then this guy would shut down. And you would see the group would glare at him, grumble. You could tell the discontent was growing. The staff team, which I was a part of at the time, our mindset was, okay, we need to like support this guy, manage the discontent, and try to get us on the road. And over the course of a few days, this guy ended up just not eating and drinking even. And so they had to move him on to get appropriate medical care. It was no longer safe for him to stay in the woods. And the whole staff team had this, and the group too, had this big sigh of relief. It was like, okay, he's getting taken out. Now we're going to be a functional team. Now we're going to get all our stuff done, hike. Everyone's going to support each other. And that feeling lasted about 2 hours until somebody just slid right into his same spot. A kiddo that had been up to that point reasonable, friendly, relational, just started emotionally escalating. And it's not hard to think of reasons why that could have happened in his individual case, but what was fascinating for me was the timing and just the idea that we had just created this vacuum of this role of the scapegoat in that group, and within hours somebody else had voluntarily slotted themselves into it, and so the group dynamic remained unchanged. And that was one of the staff said, "Oh, I guess the group's haunted," and that stuck with me. That idea of, like there's an energy or a zeitgeist in there that has a continuous thread regardless of who the actual membership in the group. And this is congruent with our observations of human groups, of course, but they even like primatologists have documented this pretty consistently, where a group of chimps, for example, will like corner one member and like scream at them and yell at them. And if you take that member out of the group, they just like find another person to do that with. Okay, how was that? Was that too long-winded, Adon, to do right?
That was great, if I do say so.
Yeah. I always
yeah. So yeah, thanks, Brent. I thought that was great. It took us a while to figure out what to call the lens that we use to look at group dynamics with myth. And we ended up landing on the mythodynamic lens. So what is the mythodynamic lens? It's a combination of well, it is group relations theory looked at through mythology and archetypes. So this being like a Jungian forward organization. I'm sure there are lots of people here who will get the essence of this, but I won't dive too deep into the group relations theory, but I'll give it an overview. So group relations, go for it.
Hey, Don, one of the things I think I missed the cue on here is just that, like, why myth? And talking to a bunch of Jungians, it's not really a hard sell, I imagine. But Marion Woodman has this talk called "Sitting by the Well," and just to keep it real brief, she talks about the use of the story and that element of over dramatization as being very, very useful. And she's talking about from trying to understand the individual psyche, applying myth and archetypes to understanding ourselves. But that over dramatization allows things to become more visible. And that piece is going to be a thread throughout. It's a valid criticism of all of this and all of our work, in my opinion, is that, okay, well, that's ridiculous. You're talking about like Persephone energy in the group or whatever, like the Circe archetype showing up. It's over dramatized, but we do that on purpose in the spirit of asking better questions and becoming curious. And applying like archetypal thinking. Yeah.
And then that ties into the group relations theory as well, where consultants within group relations, it's a type of way, it's a way to understand a group and organizational dynamics, and you do it in real time, in the here and now, and the consultants point out the unconscious dynamics emerging in the here and now. And consultants will often use like a hyper vivid image to point out to the people in the group what's happening. So I guess that dovetails with the idea that we're using big imagery to try and make it obvious what we see happening in the group. But yeah, group relations theory, just to run through it very quickly, is psychoanalysis, a systems theory, Wilfred Bion's theory of groups, and then there's also a big focus on how authority is exercised and experienced within groups. So examining both formal and informal sources of authority and how these affect group interactions and decisions. And then there's a lot on leadership and power and understanding how that's distributed, consciously and unconsciously among the group and how that impacts the relationships. So a little bit on what a group relations conference is. You could think of it as a temporary learning institution, and it's like an incubator for an exploration of organizational life. So members and staff bring together their experiences in the conference, and there's all of your hidden assumptions about the organizations, how people work with each other, come up. So we also bring our less conscious roles to this, and the group relations conference is a way to explore why we might keep appearing or find ourselves in the same tragedies or the same situations in our organizations over and over. So it's possible to learn about these hidden assumptions in ourselves and others.
And just as even breaking it down more basic, a group relations conference is usually, I mean, the one that I love going to is hosted at a conference or a conference center outside of Boston. And it's usually a bunch of folks that are in the world of therapy or consulting or coaching. And you're broken up into small groups with the instructions effectively are to talk about the dynamics in the group as they unfold, which is an extremely experiential and really revealing, vulnerable task effectively. So it's, you're sitting in the room facing these people and then talking about who's taking up what roles, what's coming up for you, the fantasies that come up, and playing around with like who's taking up what role, who's empowered to speak on certain pieces, whose voice is lost in the mix. What you find is that it is incredibly uncomfortable, and inevitably it's a regressive experience for many people, where we get to see a little bit of what's underneath. We go back to our old patterns, and then as you start to process it later on in the conference, you see some common threads, as Adon was saying, around how you showed up in the conference, a completely novel environment, with how you show up in a work environment, or potentially your family environment, or your friend environment.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So over to you, Brian, for the next two.
Yeah. The group, I've been to tons of different therapeutic conferences, and group relations work is way different than anything else. It's hard to even describe in words, but the defining characteristics are that we are taking this lens of the group as a whole, and effectively, once you step foot on a group relations conference, you're encouraged to engage in this idea, this belief that the group has a mind of its own. And people kind of go back and forth on that, and you can be agnostic to that idea and still benefit from the process, in my experience. But we're really taking this stance of the group is if there's 8 people in a group, the group itself is like the 9th member with its own motivations. It's a powerful force that pulls us into different roles. Just so the comment here from Raymond says, perhaps the second boy who shut down in the wilderness therapy example might have decided this was the way out. And it's a great question, and I want to use this around the group relations work. Asks us to set aside explanations that center on individual motivations without the group context. So yes, valid, right? Valid observation. Within this specific realm, we're tasking ourselves with thinking about the effect of the group and what might be going on there. Not because we're asserting that's the right answer or the only way to look at it, but in the spirit of asking better questions and trying to understand groups at a deeper level. Let's see, what about, I feel like I missed something on that last slide. So
there you go.
Yeah. The here and now immediacy I love, because it exposes the group defense mechanisms immediately. Pretty consistently in these conferences, you're sitting next to fairly educated people. A lot of them have read a ton of psychology work, done therapy themselves, been a therapist, but just asking folks to talk about the dynamics in the room makes it a scary thing to do. It exposes ourselves in some sense. And so there's you can't be in a group relations conference and actually engage in it without feeling like you're at risk a little bit. There's like something at stake. Yourself is exposed in some way. And so
yeah, you feel naked.
You feel naked, and that type of learning goes straight into your nervous system, in my experience. Like the stuff that happens in a group relations conference, it sticks with me. It's really powerful learning. Mm-hmm. And then we just had this idea of, this is helpful to frame it, like, what is the group unconscious up to? important to note, when we say group unconscious, we're not referring to the idea of the collective unconscious. We're referring to this like time-bound, very specific group psyche of that particular group. Yeah, so yep.
We
is this you or me, Ada?
This is you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so on that group unconscious, we typically in work groups especially, we'll have an espoused group goal, which Bion refers to as the work group, which is that would be in an organization what they convey as a explicit mission statement. Mm-hmm. And then what we're looking for in the group relations work is the unconscious pulling the group away from that work group, from that mission statement. So mm-hmm. This is, I'm sure, a common experience for, I would say, probably everyone in here. You have a group, you have a task, and somehow the group's finding ways to sabotage that task or get off task and get pulled into some other stuff, whether that is subtle ways that the group wants to explore attraction within its membership, whether that is triggering a fight or flight reaction to a perceived threat, whether that is
waiting for leadership for someone else to take a leadership position.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Codependence. Right. These are all ways that the subconscious subverts that mission statement, the thing that we say we're here to do. We find ways to sabotage it to meet these unspoken group needs.
Mm-hmm. 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 So when it comes to the myth and archetypes piece of this, which is obviously very, very important, the Jungians here will I'm sure this will be familiar to you, but the idea that stories have a staying power, and that they've been stories that have been told across time and cultures. They have a deeper reflection of who we are as people and as cultures, and then that these myths can be imagined as accounts of within. And then what we do is we use that account of within to understand a group rather than an individual, as Brandt was saying earlier. So, as it says here, there's been very little focus on post-Jungian scholars on group psychology, with the exception of one we'll touch on later, and that's what we set out to do, to try and make sense of groups using archetypes and myth.
I think an important I don't know, a piece of the story around this work is that we loved the group relations work and we love the mythopoetic work. And I mean, I at least was, during the pandemic, I was desperate to like use my time wisely while I was trying to manage this nonprofit and felt like the world was falling apart. I like retreated to this place of wanting to like study effectively and like try to bring some good into my own personal life while in the midst of this crazy situation. And I was not able to find the type of resources that I wanted around this stuff. And so I ended up, effectively writing about it. And there have been a few great texts that have come out in the last 2 to 3 years that we end up citing from and pulling from in this work. But I'm actually glad that I didn't have those in hand, because I don't think we would have like put pen to paper in the same way to synthesize the mythopoetic and the group work, even though once you do, it becomes so clear how they can fit together really nicely.
Yeah, and that's where we met too. We met at an online conference actually in 2021, and we connected over shared ideas of Robert Bly and more, and you actually sent me my first copy of Ira and John, which I
yeah, I sure did. But so that last piece I've said already, and I want to just say it one more time. I encourage you to, I'm not asking anyone to not think that our ideas are dumb. What I'm asking for is the agnostic stance and the curiosity around it. Like I maintain my skepticism. I have like a very confrontational, challenging personality, and half the time when I'm in a group relations conference, like I'll have those same kind of old doubts come up. It's like, oh, that's a stupid explanation for this. Like clearly clearly it's because X, Y, and Z, or that's because of that person's personality. What makes this work effective is just being willing to play what if, it's a sense of like play. Adon and I are not asking anyone to like drink the Kool-Aid fully as much as like have a sense of play with it.
Yeah, I think Jung called that like pushing aside nothing butting. It's like you can nothing but ideas, but if you actually consider them, they can be interesting. So what you're seeing here is an application of these archetypes within organization, and this is from Paul Moxneys, who is the only other person that we have found that has written on this in organizations. But I guess Moxneys asked himself what was the very first organization, and the only answer he could find is the family. So then obviously he saw that Freud, Jung, and Bion, and even Darwin had similar ideas. So then he took, as Brand said earlier, Melanie Klein's splitting and projection theory, and then first applied to groups by Bion, and then he applied it to organizations. So as you can see here, you can see what the end result was with the images chosen by Brandt and I, of course. But I guess what he was trying to figure out was a deeper way to understand the interactions in organizations rather than the functional behaviorist psychological theories at the time.
Yeah, and I think importantly, so Paul Moxneys has a pretty strict delineation of these 8 roles, or I think it's 7 or 8 like multifaceted roles, and how they can show up in either shadow or the embodied sense. In our work in the book and in how we speak to it, we end up being pretty fluid with archetypes. I can remember times in group relations conferences, for examples, where like you'll have these moments where just imagery will come to you, and sitting in a small group and having just realizing, oh, like you're the judge, this person's acting as the jury, and like you have the executioner over here. Like that was the imagery that came up for me, and clearly that doesn't fit right in with these 8 archetypes. I like the idea of not having strict boundaries around them, because I think it encourages that like expansive kind of like playful stance. So this is a reference to somebody who's done some similar work. I think Paul Moxneys wrote a book with a very provocative title that I can't quite remember, but it's only available in Norwegian or Swedish. Is that right?
Yeah, convenient. You can't remember. It's pretty crazy. It's in Norwegian. It's in Norwegian.
It's something to the extent of like witches, whores, and something in looking at like institutional archetypes. And we haven't read it. It's not in English, but we have interacted with Paul Moxneys quite a bit.
Yeah. And I guess I literally just came from a group relations conference where I was consulting on staff, and the just every time you go, you come out so much richer, because you see all of these patterns. And this was like one of the first times I was in a consultant role, and you come out even more rich. Well, the experience is great, even if you're staff or participant, but even the stepping into your authority, for example, was a big thing that came up for me. But I just wanted to touch on every morning in this specific conference, which it's called Tulk. I'll get Rula to pass it on to all of you. Based out of Sweden, we have a dream matrix, and the dreams that come up, it's quite beautiful. The dreams that come up in the mornings paint a picture of basically what's happening in the group psyche, and the consultants will weave together a story based on the participants' dreams on what's happening in the group. And you can often see these sorts of images, as Brand said, come up even in the dreams. It's pretty wild. But I thought I'd touch on that. So book cover, Brand.
Yeah, this is put his name in the chat here. Multi-Lens collaborated with us to create this. There's this feels like a spoiler, but you really can't spoil a group relations conference because it is so experiential. But there's a chair arrangement that they use, a specific chair arrangement traditionally in the large group that they hold, and it's a spiral pattern, which means that no matter how much you twist and turn as a group and as a group psyche, you end up centering one or two people depending on how they set up the spiral, which becomes a piece of the conversation. Typically, it's like the placement of where people sit is deemed as data about the group unconscious. In this example, though, and really the spirit of the work is this idea that the group ends up drawing out roles or archetypes from individuals. And so that, like, for example, on the right side there, that's Set, the Egyptian god Set, who is the Disney movie Lion King is said to play out that story of his stealing the throne. So he's got like this kind of undermining revolutionary energy. This is Gilgamesh in the center here, and we talk a little bit about that that archetype of the tyrant in the book and how that shows up. And so the idea, though, is that these archetypal kind of like energies get pulled out of us and displayed as the roles that we take up in groups, right? So we're getting, and it's not with our explicit permission. The group is powerful, and based on our own valence for it and our own personal backgrounds and personality factors and the context of the group, we can either study these factors, get curious about them, and start to like develop our awareness, and which gives us more choices about how we do show up in groups, or we can be swept away by them and stay unconscious about the power of the group and the roles that it pulls us into. Yeah,
I think Jung called it like a gradient, a psychological gradient for like where we tend to end up in groups. And like we've both been to so many of these that, the idea is that you would learn and apply, and they help you do that in the conferences. But you can find yourself like saying, hello, my old friend, to these patterns that keep coming up over and over. It's very interesting. So Brant, over to you.
Yeah, okay. I think I just touched on this. Basically, it's like we can train ourselves to become more aware in the moment when this stuff's happening, and that will feel like a superpower when you see it in action. When you watch, I mean, to me, Leslie Brissett with the Tavistock Institute is a good example. He was, I would consider him a mentor in the work. He was one of the first people I kind of saw decoding the group, seeing the matrix like in real time, and calling some of that stuff out with brutal, unapologetic energy, just crisp clarity around what roles are happening in the group. And a lot of the time I hated him for it in the conference I was in, because I was getting so much enjoyment from I think I'd entered into this one dynamic where I was like, there was like attraction that got explored between memberships, and which is a sticky thing to navigate. Like especially if you're in like a relationship outside and you have to deal with just the natural like attractions that come up in the groups. There's like an enjoyment that comes from that, and a resentment that can happen when somebody calls it out and, so to speak, spoils the fun or spits in the soup. And I think I had just enough awareness to watch Leslie do his work and understand that I was witnessing something that was profoundly deep and powerful and very piercing around what's actually happening in the room. And just the idea that if he's able to pop that bubble in a way that effectively offends me for a reason I can't compellingly describe, that there's some real learning in there. And so I view folks that are able to navigate these complex group dynamics at a high level. It's incredible.
Wizards.
It's like a superpower. Yeah, it Wizards. Is magical to watch.
It really is. It really is. So next one, go for it.
Yeah. And again, the intention, we've been hitting this one on the head quite a bit, but we're aiming to become more conscious our work in groups. That doesn't mean that we're always taking a stance of challenging and naming dynamics constantly in every group that we're in. That would be, I mean, honestly, that would be the archetype of the like first year clinical grad student that, you know, goes home for Thanksgiving and is like trying to do therapy on their family. Like, of course, we're not trying to get to there as an end result, but just having a sense of the currents that are shifting, the unwritten contracts that are being signed, the trade-offs that are happening, the scapegoating, the hero complexes developing, all of these little pieces. If we can start to see those threads, we can lead more effectively. We can stay out of trouble in terms of relational trouble. We can just navigate more smoothly on organizational projects. We can understand more quickly and accurately when the group's off task and craft interventions more intelligently around like correcting that. And yeah, just like this idea of building agency when we're aware of something, same as in the realm of personal psychology and personal development. When we become more aware of a pattern, suddenly we have the option to do something different. I put this, we put this one on. Adon is actually, I think, really good at this. I can tend to become too serious and rigid at times. And so I really like to emphasize this idea of becoming playful and curious in the work. We're missing the mark if we are stone cold serious all the time in group relations work. In fact, I would say inevitably, if there's no element of play involved, we're being sucked into some sort of role. We're doing something for the group, right? Like a piece of our humanity is being compartmentalized or projected onto another, and that for that to be the case. And so this is just like a helpful reminder.
All right, we're on to the myths, the stories.
Yeah. Okay. I think Adon's got the juiciest one, but this is the one we decided to kind of warm everyone up with first. And this is the idea of Persephone and the trip to the underworld. It appears in our chapter. The book looks at what I would call overlapping archetypal ideas. And so in this chapter, we're looking at murder and repression in groups. So murder or death in myth and how that relates as a metaphor for repression of ideas or members or viewpoints in groups. And so I like this one as an introductory piece because I think most folks in the psychodynamic traditions will have an understanding for it. And that's this idea that Persephone, who represents this rejuvenative forces, this vulnerability, like the spring energy, can be repressed and shoved down into the underworld, right? There's, as always in these myths, there's like these beautiful little touches that I find really relevant that we tease apart. Like for those of you that don't know the myth, Persephone is out picking flowers and with her consort and gets distracted to go pick the narcissus flower. And when she does, a hole in the ground springs up and Hades jumps out and abducts her down into the underworld. And that Narcissus, of course, like Narcissus has a very interesting metaphorical place in myth and is one of the words that as a culture we've started using more and more and more. I don't know, Adon, if you have that engram of the like usage of the of narcissism in the English language, but especially as social media has come up, we've seen that be used as a insult, I guess. You know, I don't need to tell you guys hear it and see it. Like narcissism in leadership, narcissism and how it correlates with social media. I find it fascinating that in the Narcissus myth, Echo is the name of the nymph that he rejected. And there's this idea of like an echo chamber in social media and in the rise of the use of narcissism as a word in social media, but it's kind of a different myth. But we use this idea of Persephone being abducted to the underworld as a metaphor for repression of the vulnerable and regenerative forces in groups. I grew up playing lacrosse and in the 90s in a lacrosse locker room in the early 2000s, like there was a celebration of what I would call Hercules energy and a repression of what I would call Persephone energy, vulnerability, sharing feelings. A lot of the teams and even organizational groups that I've worked with, surprisingly, even in like the therapeutic sector, really don't have a lot of tolerance for that. And without having the names and the metaphors for it, you can kind of tune into that a little bit. But oftentimes, if you're me, at least, I would just end up cooperating with the group taboos and unconsciously understanding that these are where the boundaries are. But looking at this myth of Persephone as active repression of vulnerability, of like open communication, expressive communication, intimate sharing, regenerative powers or forces, that's a helpful kind of like metaphor for me to understand like what's actually happening in the group. And let's see, what else do I want to say about that? Yeah, the one delineation or piece that I think can trip people up is that a healthy group doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's always being expressly vulnerable. I've seen organizations where there's an overcommitment to always being performatively vulnerable. I've seen it in men's groups specifically. That
emotional incontinence.
Yeah, and so I've seen. I mean, the way that shows up for me, just off the top of my head, is watching men's groups that meet whatever every week and really dive into the feeling, that celebrating the Persephone energy. And it's refreshing because a lot of these men, my generation and older specifically, grew up in a culture where there was much less acceptance around and not much teaching with boys around how to be expressive and how to do anything but like tough it out, right? And so the inverse shadow side of that is men learning to be what I would call performative with emotions. And so you see them effectively, beautifully crying and sharing about their experience with X. And then a year later, you kind of see them do the same thing with that same energy. And it starts to feel like, okay, there's some stuckness there. You're gratuitously in this like Persephone energy, and the group is about celebrating that without really moving forward.
Or without wondering why, what that's doing for the group or for the person, or what's going on.
Right. Yeah. Like, what is it that what group need is getting met through this repetitive emoting and like just celebration of that. And the point I was trying to make is that a healthy group is going to use the context of the situation and external factors, what the task is, to kind of summon up the appropriate archetypal energy for the moment, right? Like if you're, I was talking about on the lacrosse field, or I guess that's probably not a sport that resonates a ton with mostly UK based crowd, but on the football pitch or whatever, like there's a time for heavy action. Yeah, right. There's a time for action and focus and being in the zone and drive, which would correspond more to like what we talk about as like Hercules energy in the book. But when there's repression and an active taboo against expressing a certain archetypal energy, that's when we start to say that there's a hang up or some work to be done in the group as a whole. Does that make sense?
Okay. You finished on that, Brent? Anything else you want to say?
I think so. Yeah, we could. That one's the main piece, is just that idea of using Persephone as a stand-in for like the vulnerable energy that then gets repressed often in groups. We could dive into kind of more of the nuances around like eating the pomegranate seeds and all these pieces that we do dive a little bit more into the group, but that's the general idea. Yeah.
Okay. So on to the myth of Circe and Odysseus. So Brant is far more logos, and he's very good at pointing things out and making things understandable, and I'm not the best, so you'll bear with me here. But so this is actually a personal story from a group relations conference. So the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, which is separate from the Tavistock Clinic, they separated back in the 50s. And the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations are basically, the They're near you, Rula, there in London. They're the gold standard, say. Well, in some eyes they're not. There's a lot of competition in the world too. They are the gold standard for the group relations conferences. So they host a 2-week conference called the Leicester Conference, and I did that back in 2022. So you're literally 2 weeks residential, every single day, working basically 9 to 9 in groups to figure out the dynamics together. So it's very intense and incredibly rewarding. So it was actually at this conference, before Brant and I discussed even getting together to do this book, that this idea came out just from the unconscious, I guess, right? I guess I studied classics in university, minored in classics before doing psychology. So I guess that's where I touched on that too. I would often look at it through a psychodynamic lens. But for those that aren't familiar with the myth of Circe, it comes from the Odyssey, right, Brant? Yes. Okay. So Odysseus and his men land on the island of Aea, home of the goddess and sorceress Circe. Circe's home is surrounded by strangely docile lions, and in some they're pigs. So she invites Odysseus' men to a meal of honey, cheese, and wine, and which she has laced with a magical potion. So upon eating the meal, Odysseus' men are turned into pigs. So when Odysseus goes to rescue his men, the messenger god Hermes tells Odysseus to eat molly herb to protect himself from Circe's allure. So the Hermes is often associated, I'm sure you know this, with the unconscious. So that which goes between borders. And I think the Herms were the stones that marked the borders of the city in ancient Greece and Rome. So Hermes tells Odysseus to eat the molly herb to protect himself from Circe's allure, and to lunge at her, or to I guess to be aggressive, or to get aggressive when she tries to strike him with her sword. So Odysseus follows Hermes' instructions, and as a result, Circe immediately becomes friendly and helpful, eventually becoming Odysseus's lover. So Odysseus and his men then live with Circe in luxury for a year. So how does this relate to group relations? Or group relations conferences, group dynamics. So I was at an intergroup event in Leicester, which happens after like the second or third day. And what that does is they try and they separate the conference, or the whole conference meets in one room. The task is read out by the director, and everybody is then instructed to go and basically form their own groups. So the idea then is the unconscious will work its way in the group, and the groups will form and people will join the groups. And then it can be based on any themes. I know there was like one of, say it could be race, there could be one of attraction, there could be one of, different topics and subjects. So where am I? So group formation. So a bunch of groups formed in this intergroup event, and I was drawn to join this particular group of this person I'll call Z, and I remember being, it wasn't conscious at the time, but I was very influenced by her expressiveness. She was always very sultry and complimenting my physique, and being very expressive, even like sexually expressive at times in the groups. So then I find myself going to this group, I have no idea what's going on, consciously at least. And then over the next 2 days, I find myself getting more and more unable to engage, literally getting tired, growing very silent. And eventually I abruptly leave the session. I can't help myself. I have no idea of what's going on, literally, for myself. So returning the next day, ready to go and ready to try and figure out what's going on, ready to work with the intergroup dynamics, I still can't participate, and I sit in silence. So then I guess the idea is that there's something indigestible going through me, and I'm trying to figure that out. So I actually ask the group to help me articulate what's happening, because I can't put words on it. And there's obviously people in the group who are going to be more seasoned in what might be happening. And then Z, this person, points out that I'm jealous of her dynamic between a male member, her and another male member. And this resonates deeply with me. And then this idea of the molly herb, where something is brought to consciousness. I know that's what it was used for in Greece and Rome. Lots of associations with coming to consciousness, or so if you eat the molly herb, that's the idea of coming to consciousness of what is holding you back unconsciously. So then it really didn't sit well with me. I felt a lot of shame that I was drawn to this group through this through desire, basically, an attraction. And then this unrequited desire led to this jealousy and this competition, and then my usual pattern is to withdraw. So I guess the point here is, drinking Circe's potion. And then as I talk to the group and ask them to help me what's going on, I sort of step more into a leadership role within the group, myself, eating the molly herb and try to figure out what's going on, developing consciousness about these forces that are happening. And I guess, yeah, again, it's just an expansive metaphorical way to understand what's happening, and then tying it to a story to try and sort of see how these things can affect you in groups. And so you can be more conscious to work with it instead of letting it work you. So, yeah.
Yeah. And one thing that sticks out to me from that story, Adon, is the shifts that happen when like that bubble gets popped. So when Z offers that piece of insight around jealousy, and you said, there's like these real definitive moments of the dynamic shifting, right? Like in these internal, like kind of cataclysms, like where a lot's going on for you.
And it really,
and that's like typical.
It bursts the bubble. You feel way lighter in your body. It's absolutely incredible. It's like to see these dynamics at play in real time. And that's the beauty of the conferences, is that, in the real world, you don't get to have these experiences very quickly, like, joining a group, dealing with dynamics, leaving a group, you don't get to experience that. But in these, you get to experience all of those feelings very quickly, and to be more skilled in pointing them out and feeling them. And yes.
Yeah. And the story also allows us to like anchor, we get to really anchor that experience in that story. Something about, people remember stories resonate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that's coming to the end pretty much. I think we ran a lot over time.
Did we? Wait, I thought we were doing pretty good.
Okay. Great. All right. There we go.
Yeah.
Maybe it speaks to my nerves.
So if we are at that hour time, we can do the breakout with the prompts. We'd be happy to do that. We have that set up. Is that okay? I'm getting the go ahead on that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. We'd love to invite you. First of all, I did see a few questions pop up into the chat. I think I did my best to answer some of these. With is owner a name, or is that? I see owner asked about that Puer Eternus.
That's just someone's name in
Gotcha.
Zoom, so you can just address it.
Yeah, well, this would be the part of the presentation where we're going to ask you guys to ponder and chew on it. So I'd be kind of curious what you think. I'd reflect that back. We certainly speak to, Robert Bly talks about the flying boy archetype, and we talk a little bit about like group stages with Tuckman's model, and how leadership shows up in those specific stages, and how like group avoidance comes up in immature leadership. I don't want to stay in this like lecturing space, so I'd like to kind of reflect it back to you guys. The prompt simply that Adon and I wanted to invite you to chew on in smaller groups was, which character do you find yourself embodying in groups? And it does not necessarily need to be a specific character from Greek mythology, or from Norse mythology or Egyptian mythology or whatever. Like, really where you can be a little creative with it, right? Like you can, like
be creative.
Severus Snape, or you can draw from whatever story catches you and whatever feels real in that for that conversation.
And we could do breakouts for a few minutes to let people talk among themselves.
Yeah,
if that's possible, Rula and Sandra.
Yeah. Sure. Sarah, I think you could do it from your end because you have the access. So
yeah. How big did you want the groups?
What it looks like there is about.
We've got 35 people.
35, 5 each. But that would be great. Brant, what do you think?
Yeah, that's great. Perfect.
Okay.
Just to say, this has been amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
That's really cool to hear. Thank you.
Cool. Hey, Don, are you and I going to stay here, or do you want to join a group?
We can stay for a second, and then I think we can join and hear what. Okay. Well, what do you think?
Yeah. Either way is fine. I maybe giving people
some chance to breathe.
Yeah, without us in it would be good.
That's fair because might hold back. Actually, that's cool.
Cool. I love. Hey Don, I've said this to you before, but I love how like you're stuck with the burden again.
Okay.
That's fascinating. I like the idea of the group auditioning.
Yep. Yeah, that's key. And I think there are specific crucial moments. We talk about this in the chapter on scapegoating, is you'll often see, I think there are two types of scapegoats. There's the one that gets banished and is more the etymology of the word is traditionally like the goat is sent off into the woods, or members of the community are like banished or stoned effectively. But there's also the type of scapegoat the group keeps around and just constantly is loading their projections onto, and they really are strangely fiercely protective of that type of scapegoat too.
Yeah, that's pharmacon and pharmakos.
Yeah. Well, do you want to?
Well, yeah, I think we should probably move on to the weaving of the plenaries, but quickly, the word for medicine and the word for scapegoat are like incredibly similar. They come from the same root. Anyways, do you want to introduce the plenary, Rula?
Credit to Steve Creamy for that that observation. That was really beautiful. Yeah. Okay, so Go ahead. Okay. I was going to, or Adon and I were going to invite you guys now. Hopefully you had some fruitful discussion, or even maybe there were some awkward silences and moments of like wishing you were in a different room or with a different group, or like the negative feelings that come up are part of even just like quick temporary groupings. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. I'm curious if we can do this, to hear your reflection on the roles that got taken up in the small groups. So that would be bringing it closer into this idea of the here and now. I guess it's there and then because we're talking about the groups, but instead of keeping it kind of up in the head and in the reflective space of asking how you guys think you show up, did you notice any specific roles or people taking on specific roles in the group? Did you notice within yourself different ideas or fantasies of wanting to show up or speak or not speak or withdraw or take up lots of space? What came up?
I can talk. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I just, as an aside, I have a little bit of problem with a positive and negative dichotomy, and I'd rather kind of think of it as all welcome and all part of it. And in our group, we had 3 of us, and one person shared, and I kind of jumped to making a comment or adding more information, and the other person in the group was wise enough to pause and ask questions and elicit more from the person who was speaking. So I was aware very much of our beauty to sort of self-correct and to go towards cohesion and for a deeper dive. So that was actually a very pleasurable experience in the end.
So somebody took on a role of the therapist, effectively?
I'm not sure a therapist, just showing interest, asking more open-ended questions, and which ended up being exactly the right move at that point, which I appreciated that modeling. And that's all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Would anyone also like to jump in?
Gottfried has his hand up.
Ah, Gottfried, hello.
Thank you. Hello. In our group, we had just come to the subject of, I think Mimi spoke about from a theater background of being assigned a role, and it touched with what you, Brandt, and Adon were just speaking when we came back about the scapegoat, and I don't remember that you used the term, but implicit in a lot of what you have been so wonderfully presenting, thank you very much for that, seemed to be an implication of a mutuality.
Yes.
Of the meaning on the one part, the group assigning a role, as in this impressive example, I think, from you, Brandt, with the boy who lost it. Sorry, I don't mean it disrespectfully, and then being replaced immediately, but also implicit somehow. To what extent do we pull these? I mean, each of us in a group, do we pull these roles then that are then put over us in that sort of mutuality? And that's, and I'm interested in that, if you could possibly comment on that a little bit more.
So sorry, just to make sure I understand, are you this idea of like being pulled and like placed into roles? Is that what you were speaking to?
Yeah, I mean sorry, the word doesn't exist. The kind of bothness, the bothness of being placed into the role, but also attracting this being placed into specific role X.
Yeah.
And that
so
interplay.
Yep. I mean, that's what the work's about, right? Like, I think that's a hanging question that is important and very difficult to boil down in some sort of, soundbite answer, right? That's what we're curious about.
Yeah.
How do these roles come up? How do they, I can talk about kind of my reads and interpretations in specific scenarios. In the book, we talk about this one just spectacular scapegoating example where, this was at a time, it was within hold on, what's happening right now in the here and now is I'm getting pulled back into this lecturing archetypal space. I'm gonna decline that invitation. Let's hear more from the group. But yeah, that's great observing. I appreciate your
that's good role valence. That's kind of what we're touching on. But yeah, please, more from the group would be great.
May I respond to, we were talking in our group with Gottfried and Lisa and Peter about how you can be cast in a role, and it can be maybe a role you don't want to play, but it also may be that you are cast in a role that awakens something in you, an archetypal energy in you that you didn't know was in you, that can be very expanding. And I don't think in terms of negative and positive, but we were speaking of being open to, well, maybe I will be receptive to being mantled, cast in a role, and then see what you find out about that. So we were looking at this in an open learning perspective and orientation. So you can have yourself very expanded in a group when you're given or mantled or cast in a role.
Definitely. If you want to share, what do you find yourself cast into?
Well, I'm the one that shared that that's what I look for. I will share. I've been cast as leader. I've been cast as outsider. I've been cast as both princess and queen. I've been cast as witch. I've been cast as know what the role would be, the one who speaks the shadow, the tragic messenger.
Nice.
There's often, I think, in groups, there can be someone who carries the shadow for the group and sometimes will speak to the shadow and experience the consequences, fallout, responses. But I've been cast in many different roles. But then again, I'm in theater. I've been in theater a lot of my life. And I'm very comfortable in discovering the many different roles that my energy may elicit in a group. So I might also share, there's a term from theater that I think is part of what you two are after with this. It's called metaxis, from the Greek metaxu, in between. And it describes the dual consciousness of an actor in a role, playing the role, who is on the one hand, I'm Kevin Kline playing the role of, in Midsummer Night's Dream, a bottom. And I'm also Kevin Kline. And I know I'm, as I'm imagining him in that role in that play, the actor knows himself as himself or herself as herself and knows themselves in the role. And the double consciousness is called metaxis. And it comes from Augusta Boal. And that, I think, is a lot of what I'm trained to do. So I bring that with me into a group. I'm not sure that's helpful for others. There's a helper. There's a role I like playing the role of helper. And I love playing the role of muse. That's my favorite role. If I could have a favorite. Anyway, I've talked more than enough.
That's great.
Thank you very much. That's fantastic.
See Teresa with a hand up.
Yeah, Teresa.
Hello. Let's see. So we were in a great small group, and I was hoping that Jocelyn or Paula would speak up, but they might not. So I'm going to take the moment. Aidan, first we had to just acknowledge how incredibly brave you were to come back to the group, and submit yourself to that process. So we spent just a few moments about how our complexes can get triggered and how, we want to be really protective of ourselves. So thank you for sharing that. And then one of the things that we discovered with looking at Persephone and Demeter and Circe and Odysseus is that, well, especially in Persephone story, the unseen or the unconscious piece is about Zeus and Hades. Like here's aggressive masculine energy, where Zeus and Hades make agreement that Persephone can be taken away, kidnapped.
Yeah.
And boy, does that make Demeter mad, and also Jocelyn was speaking to the arrival of all these men onto her sacred ground. Like she didn't invite them to land there. And that navigating both what, let's say, what we get angrier about or kidnapped into, but then come to find the piece that we like Persephone becomes queen of the underworld. You know, she likes that too.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's great. Yeah.
You know, so we were just kind of exploring the flip sides of these energies. So that's what I wanted to share.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'm reflecting. I don't think I did a great job of fleshing out the Persephone myth, because there are some other pretty beautiful pieces in addition to what you said, or that touch on a lot of this, like Helios being the one that spills the truth to Demeter, and we talk a little bit about that too, around how the relationship between sun deities, or like truth tellers, and taboo and repression, and how often like the sun, there's a Shinto myth with Amaterasu, the sun goddess, where she's like stuck in a cave effectively, and just looking at how groups maybe was that a thumbs up, you know, that one. So yeah, just
I love that myth. I love that myth.
Right. Yeah. And so looking at just like how groups do the prep work to do deeds in the dark, so to speak, and how they recruit, like I would say we're seeing that on both ends of this political spectrum in our society right now, is like a battle for what we can decide is taboo, and what is even allowed to be discussed, right? So it's like the sun goddess is like trapped in the cage, or in the cave, so to speak. Yeah, I go off on these like tangential metaphors pretty often when we do this, so I'll shut up now. But see, Luis has a hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Oh gosh, yeah, I really enjoyed this evening, and I do a lot of work in groups, and I'm also really interested because, as you both quite rightly said, there's very little written about Jungian or analytical psychology and group work. So many reflections, but the one I was just going back to what somebody else was talking about, and what you were touching on, about this idea of roles, of being pulled into a role, and then the other idea of we pull on a role, a bit like a coat. And so what I was thinking of in particular relation to through a Jungian lens of a group is also this idea of psyche pulling us into a role. Actually, for example, I'm feeling it right now. It's a different kind of energy. It's like an energy that comes up through my feet, and like I felt compelled to speak because there's something about psyche wants to say something, and I'm the mediator. And so it's more of a reflection than a question, or maybe it is a question of, you know, how does psyche get a voice in the group, so we're not all interpreting each other.
Seems like someone wants to respond to that. 2 hands up.
Mine was actually unrelated. Peter, did you want to respond?
Maybe. I was just moved to raise my hand when the idea of what does of Psyche speaking came up, and I'm waiting for Psyche to move me, and I'm checking now to see if I'm moving, and I think I'm moving a little. What I'm curious about is just that is how do we constellate conscious groups so that we are responsive to what Psyche wants from us.
Yeah.
Thinking about Jung's desire to personify the unconscious as a totality, as a human community, and research coming out of Harvard in the 90s that said the next stage of human moral development could not be embodied by a person, but would require being embodied by a group. So I'm curious about group consciousness itself, and how I could serve it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if this moment I have served it a little.
Mm-hmm.
Where's that quote from, Peter, of Jung?
I have it within 2 minutes. It's either on a PowerPoint slide or it's right behind me there. I'll find it before we're done. If we could personify the unconscious, we might find it to be a collective human being transcending age, gender, on and on. And it's a beautiful quote, very long. But Jung seems to have been wanting the unconscious to have an ego center such that we would have its wisdom more available to us, directing us consciously. And to me, that is why I've been studying group consciousness for 40-something years, 50 years, something like that.
Have you heard of group relations before this?
A group
relations, the stuff we were talking about, the method.
It seems quite familiar to me. There's so many good versions of group practice that I think I'm witnessing one of them.
Got you. Yeah.
I just had a question. I did put it in the chat earlier, but it might have gotten lost, which is slightly unrelated to this. But so I work with applying Jungian and post-Jungian concepts to specifically cultural studies. So I'm working with the university at the minute, and their basis is cultural studies, but I find there's a lot of applicability with my work. The thing is that cultural studies basically hate step psychology now. So in the course of my MA dissertation, I worked with this group, and they were very kind in giving me the time of day, but there was a lot of kind of issues that came up. And I just wanted to know, given the two of you have been working in this space, do you have an answer to people, or like particularly academics or other practitioners who say archetypal theory is unfalsifiable, so like why should we use it? Or people from the humanities and social sciences that kind of basically use these kind of things, but they don't want to kind of name it. How would you answer that?
We've been pretty clear between ourselves, and we try to convey this, that we're not really in the business of trying to change people's minds on any of that. I believe that there's lots of evidence, if somebody is open to looking into it, around like the idea that specific characters show up in our stories over and over again, and that there's power in that, right? That says something about us. But we try to talk about this as a tool to ask better questions, and that's effectively it. So that's a pretty like low risk, answer to your question, that allows us to kind of like not get into the fray, so to speak, when we're doing these presentations. But I think that there's plenty of room to use newer kind of archetypal stuff to your earlier question, right? Like I think that there's plenty of validity there. Like we really just take a pretty conservative criteria for asking, like, is it useful for helping us ask better questions? And so an interpretation is helpful if it's increasing awareness and the thoughtfulness and intentionality around like how we work with groups.
And I guess
it's a pretty
that piece from Campbell, like Otto Rank, all of the like comparative mythologists, where you just see the same stories appearing across all of these cultures. So you can do like a reductionist explanation and be like, oh yeah, it means nothing. But how do you explain that the same stories show up over and over across the world, despite being disconnected? You can go down a rabbit hole, but
I don't know if any of you guys are Rick and Morty fans at all, but there's this really weird meta episode. I don't know if you guys, I'll just say it quickly, where it's like the ghost of Joseph Campbell is like criticizing or like meeting with the characters, and you can tell that the I forget his name, but the writer behind it is like both buys into Campbell's ideology, but also like thinks it's somewhat ridiculous at the same time, because like Joseph Campbell has a line where he's like pouring them soup, and he's like, yeah, every epic story always has the archetypal old man serving the protagonist soup, and they're like, no story has that. Like, what are you talking about? You know. And Campbell is drawing criticism for his like monomyth really not actually fitting a template that, like, a lot of stories don't necessarily follow that template per se. And to me, it's squishy stuff. It's really like difficult to codify and grab onto. That's like part of the nature of the work. I find value in it, and I think it's, if you are open-minded to it, I tend to think that it's fairly obvious that certain characters just show up, and that there's meaning and information and data in that. Like, it's weird to ignore clear data like that.
Yeah,
our culture consistently.
And if this is, I'm sure there might be some like spiritual or religious people in this group, and at a certain point there's a leap beyond rationality as well, which we don't even touch or get into. But yeah, I think Ian McGilchrist, Matter with Things, he talks about this. There's like, you know, there is this leap even in the scientific method that you're taking, and I think that comes into these stories too. It's like there's a leap you're making. Ross.
See,
Hi. So the idea of us adopting these roles, it makes me think of the Stanford Prison Project and Raoul Engulfment. And so, you know, I sort of had, when I went into my meeting, I was asked what, you know, we was talking about what roles we think we take on. And I said, I think I take on the role of the shapeshifter, because I got to a point where I was looking into things like Raoul Engulfment, and I started to feel like, you know, in the Stanford Prison Project, these students have been put into this position and they've really gone with it. And, you know, doesn't that happen to all of us? Aren't we all right from the beginning given a role by everyone around us that we just follow? And so I kind of feel like this idea of, you know, you spoke about ignoring this data. I feel like, isn't there sort of this idea? I feel like maybe we romanticize ourselves. We like to imagine that we're these, you know, like we're destined to be what we are, whereas evolution and entropy all seems quite chaotic and unsentimental about these things. So I feel like maybe, you know, I have this idea that, you know, ourselves are basically just illusions. And maybe the reason we don't, we you know, at the beginning of the seminar, you asked us to suspend our disbelief. And I feel like maybe we only need to do that because we, you know, I think all of these things are quite easily observable. So I think it's something else that's in the way that stops us seeing it. And it's this idea that each of us are not just habits, you know.
But yeah. The word reenchantment just came to me.
There's this idea, I think the phrase is minimum group paradigm, if I'm not mistaken. And it's like research that looks at what is the minimum threshold for you to start identifying with the group. And you know, again, I would argue, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the woman who spoke first, but how about I speak in, I'll use I statements and speak to my own experience. Like, when I've been in these group relations conferences, a lot of times you end up in these arbitrary groups that are either assigned based on nothing, right? Like, just pick a number, like we did in here. The amount of time it takes to start identifying with that group and having either group pride or start to like other the other groups and compare and contrast the other groups that are involved is fascinatingly little. And the Stanford prison experiment is, I think, incredibly powerful because it does also just by happenstance demonstrates that with very young and very bright people, these group forces can take them for a ride at into like very far extreme territories of behavior. It's not that it happens to only clinical adolescent populations in the woods. This is like very, very powerful forces that do not take much to trigger. And that's why that's one of the reasons I find it so fascinating. But the Stanford prison experiment, especially because you're talking about very intelligent young folks that are arbitrarily assigned to groups.
Can I say one thing here? I mean, out of the spirit of everything that is going on, and ironically, we find ourselves right now in a group discussing groups. The Psych Creative group, and just a little backstory here. Psych Creative emerged largely from unconscious processes, and it felt almost as if the psyche guides our actions without our full awareness. So this is how it all happened. When I first formed Psych Creative, and I acted on intuition rather than conscious planning, and it all happened during the time of the pandemic. So as I was briefly telling Adon and Brandt backstage before we started this session, that this was a pandemic baby. It's something that came out of perhaps a very large group's psyche, or maybe even the instinct to connect and to meet and to speak about things. So I felt like I was attuned to the psyche's impulses, and I was just responding to them in a nonverbal, instinctive manner. And then lo and behold, Psych Creative sort of found its own being into the world. So we encouraged it into being. And unexpectedly, I found myself in the group role of leader, sage, helper, I don't know. And it's a position that I hadn't consciously sought at all before any of that happened. And many of you here, of course, Sarah, Hedy, Gottfried, Louise, Jess, you've all witnessed this group's evolution. You've been there since the very beginning, and the roles that we've naturally assumed within it as well. So yeah, I mean, I just wanted to comment on the organic development of groups and how this reflects the interplay between the conscious intention and the unconscious dynamics in group formation. So yes, we felt psyche, we did what it told us to do. We were probably not entirely aware of that, I mean, in the conscious sense, but there was this unconscious force that forced itself and, through the group and through the individuals in the group, but as one whole. So that was more of a comment.
That's great.
Yeah, and just for people who are here for the first time, just so that you know, I mean, Psych Creative was like the Big Bang. It sort of emerged on its own, and we found ourselves in our different seats doing different things in it.
Very good. Very nice. Thank you.
How do you spell that so I can Google it?
Psych Reactive? Or Psych Creative?
Psych Creative, yeah. That's what we're doing right now.
Well, I'm curious. I'm interested. How do I find out more?
Okay, I'll put it in the chat box. So that's the LABRC website, and then you could just visit the Psych Creative tab over there. I'll post the link right now.
If no one else speaks up, I'm going to launch into a little mini rant here that I have on deck.
Well, I have something that's coming before you do your mini, the soliloquy. I'm remembering something I had forgotten. And this speaking about the group wants to speak, psyche wants to speak through the group, the sense of something happening. I'm remembering Jacob L. Moreno, who sometimes is credited with founding group psychotherapy and founded the very unfortunately named psychodrama discipline, and used to apparently perform, psychodrama therapy at Carnegie Hall in New York, which I find amazing. And it was he spoke to and had a whole social psychology theory. But he had a specific term he used, tele, T-E-L-E, which he said it's not telepathy, and it's a kind of intelligence, tele, that happens in a group. That the members of the group will have tele with each other. And in theater, an ensemble is formally defined as a group with a very specific actors in the group over time form a unique body of work that is recognized as only able to be done by those specific actors. It's they create something that's the group way of doing theater that nobody else does. So that's a way of recognizing, that's seeing a group, that's seeing a group's quality. But I just wanted to share, remembering what Moreno said about a theater group over time has a certain kind of knowing, tele, with each other that is just coming to me and reminding me as we're talking about this quality of groupness. And it has its own intelligence, and he used tele, which maybe we could bring back and evolve and develop. So just wanted to share that. And
yeah. Amazing. Thanks for sharing that. And I just wanted to note that part of one of the sessions at the Leicester conference was a psychodrama session. Very good. Yeah, I find very, very interesting what you've been saying about theater and the links here. So thank you.
I love that, Mimi, and it also applies to writing as well. As a matter of fact, just a few days ago, Louise and I were speaking about having a writing group because you get so much writing squeezed out when you're in a group. So we're there online writing together. And then so we were thinking, why not? I mean, maybe this is something that we could start next month. Because I do find that when I write within a group, I mean, each one is writing alone. We're doing the work individually, but we're together. And there's the tele that you're just speaking to us about right now. I think it also applies really well to any creative act.
Thank you, really, yes. And you're reminding me that I'm not doing well with names today. She taught playwriting at Lincoln Center in New York, and she would make the students sit with either their feet, they're all in a circle and all facing, and would get them to write, and that it was a different writing experience. And I once taught poetry with asking the people in the class to sit with their backs to each other in pairs, and they tele'd each other. The tele passed. It would be a fascinating thing to take this work that here and apply it to creating the creative process, any creative process. And it might move us toward what we were talking about in our group, which was when an you're given and cast in a archetype is given to you that you didn't know you were, that enhances you and enlivens and expands. That would be, a beautiful way to move your wonderful work forward, to evolve toward these aspirational archetypal qualities in ourselves. And if groups could do that, boy, oh boy.
Yeah.
That's great.
Boy, I want to repeat what you just said. If groups could do that, boy, oh boy. Boy, I'm with you. And I wonder about tele being the conscious activity between people that reflects Jung's understanding of the unconscious as teleological, telos. So if psyche is our telos and the act of tuning to it is a mystery, but if we're back to back with one another, supporting one another to find their unique voice, their destiny, then there's some integration of that unconscious telos with the conscious intention. That seems like the opportunity for the group too. You're muted.
Yes, intelligence, telos, and movement of these roles toward a, yeah, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
I love the way you're bringing movement in. This is where the I get excited with religion and its root in religio. To bind together again, that which has come apart can be bound together again. And I think this is where we can follow Thomas Merton, who writes, we must rescue the person from the individual, where the person turns back to one another and helps each other. I mean, isn't that embracing the feminine?
Oh, I love that. It feels like radical humanism.
Well, I'm
gonna spit in the soup real quick, and because it's a beautiful moment, and this is where the group relations work is. Adon's laughing at me. This is where the group relations work is especially potent. In a group relations lens and context, if I were a consultant right now, I would suggest that the group has nominated a pairing. So Peter and Mimi are very intelligent, like great, easy to listen to conversation. And the group seems to sit back and go, ah, right? And so that's the beauty. And also one of the things that I think is always comes up and is very, very fascinating is you don't get dumb people that are interested in this work. And so one of the pitfalls, and pitfalls is, I'm not trying to pin it. I'm just more like bringing us into the here and now. And like you guys feel what happens when you do that, right? It's like, whoa. For me, it's like a little jolt of like, oh, okay, like realness too. The idea of like intellectualizing and I've heard the phrase getting lost in the sauce or getting like transfixed in the beauty and the light. Keep an eye on yourself when that's coming up with group relations work, and get curious about it, right? Like ask about it. We're in a situation where that's fairly on task. It's not really, I'm not keyed in on some like taboo topic we're all trying to avoid but groups will use, you, Peter and Mimi, or whoever it is, and pair together as part of that like unconscious dynamic that comes up. And so it felt like it would be a service or maybe a disservice to not like speak to that, because it popped into my head, and that's the practice, right? Is speaking to it. Yeah. Anyways, yeah. So that's like just a little flavor of the group work and how we can like start to like bring it into the here and now. And Adon said, very uncomfortable to intervene. I think this type of work demands that we get uncomfortable and step away from the beauty in some ways. And
or the discomfort is a form of beauty.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's an encounter, and that's what you're doing. You're encountering each other in different ways.
I did want to say this. There's the idea of I think it's Kleinian, right? Like the idea of like the good mother, bad mother, right? Like this. There's something that I love and believe is an evolved viewpoint around moving away from defined dichotomies, right? And the way it's moving out of the binary is like the phrase I hear a lot of the time. And I think that there's something productive at times around understanding that the binary is a way that our psyche will divide up the world, and that that being in touch with the bad mother or the dirty, the part that makes you go like, is where a lot of the exposing work of group relations happens. And you guys are all into the Jungian world and the idea of the shadow. So I know this isn't like new concepts, but I think it's worth saying out loud in the context of the group work for sure. Yeah. So what role am I performing? I'm curious. What do you think? Yeah.
Well, this has been really, really amazing. And I also want to be mindful of our time. And also the mission of Say Creative to sort of move all of this work into that creative space. And so I wanted to thank both of you for being here with us and just see if you have a few, you know, just a little closing moment for us, and then we can sort of start to transition into the next space, if that sounds all right.
Just want to say this has been one of the longest post-talk Creative sessions that we've ever had. I mean, the discussion is just incredible, and the energy that you brought into this virtual space, Adon and Brent and everybody else is here. I mean, it's been really brilliant. So thank you so much. This is wonderful. This is very important work. I mean, at a time when people are becoming more and more separated and individualized, and I don't know what I mean in a negative sense, but we do need more talk about groups. We do need more observation of groups and actually being in groups. And again, allowing the creative space to seep in as we do what we were doing today. So thank you so much. And
yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us. And
we'd love to have you with us again. Well, usually we close after 2 hours, but we still didn't have our poetry open mic yet, and we do have a few people lined up and they would like to read their poems. But before I hand it over to Sarah, I just want to remind you all that we do have another poetry open mic happening next week. So that will be on the 25th online, and it's also free. So if anyone would like to jump in with their poems, have your poems ready, and you can sign up anytime through the website or Eventbrite. We also have the ekphrasis and iconography workshop coming up on Monday. And those of you who would like to present at our Alchemy conference coming up in Oxford, November 9 and 10, please remember that the deadline is September 30th for your proposals. So again, these are some upcoming deadlines and events. And now I'll hand it over to Sarah to take care of our lovely poets.
Yeah, well, again, thank you both so much, and please feel free to stay with us and listen to the poetry. One of the beautiful things about Say Creative that we found, speaking of the group dynamic and sort of psyche bubbling forward, is that people often think of sharing a poem and let us know early, and somehow they all just mix together and really work into a beautiful theme. And we see a lot of things sort of come forward really organically. And then we also have the space for anybody who is inspired or just has a poem that is, or really any sort of creative product that you'd like to bring forward. So I know we have Hedy and I think Gottfried and Raymond have all expressed an interest. So I think we'll start in that order, and then anybody else, you know, if you feel moved, pull up what you want to share and we'll move to you next. So Hedy, do you want to start us off?
Sure, thank you. I'll be delighted to. Do we have how many minutes? 5 minutes or less?
5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I thought I'd read a section from a long poem from my book, The Taste of the Earth. There is a section called Meditation over the Eye of Horus. And the Eye of Horus is a very, very well-known symbol, also called the Wadjet. And in this very large section, I have tried to integrate ancient Egyptian myths with personal memories, history, and linguistics. So I'll read just one of the senses, one of the 6 senses that are symbolized by the Eye of Horus. And this one is thought, and it is represented by the eyebrow. Fikr. This part of the Wadjet represents thought, symbolized by the eyebrow. My mother's perfectly traced eyebrows punctuated her mute directives in a secret language that controlled our pulse. When she'd say, "Qalbi kash zay al-zibiba," you have shrunk my heart into a raisin, we feared the next step, that of erasure. With the sempiternal dawwabti qalbi, you have melted my heart as sugar dissolves in water. Ancient Egyptians believed the heart to be the seat of consciousness and wisdom. At the final judgment, it was weighed against Maat's ostrich feather to allow the deceased to cross the pathway to the field of reeds. Is this where from we get our sense of love in connection with the heart? Does a thought espouse the rhythm of a heartbeat? When we forgive, don't we feel our heart lighter, freed from the ballast of bitterness and resentment? The wind sweeps the grass all over the Nile Valley. Flowers bend their necks. Senet, or the game of passing, led players through the 10 regions of darkness before rising dawn, offering a glimpse of immortality. I was often on my father's lap as he faced his backgammon opponents at the club. I still feel the throw of dice on the wooden board, sense his excitement with each pawn placed in my hand. Nefertari is portrayed playing Senet solo in her sheer linen dress and gold bracelets. Was she conjuring fate or her inner self, bracelets clanking together with each casting of lapis and ebony sticks? Through sepia lenses, I watched my grandmother on her wheelchair playing solitaire for hours. Was she weighing the odds of walking again, despite Lourdes and her daily Bible reading? Her ghost wrapped itself in an ink wash around my mother, guiding her hands as she aligned cards time after time. Borges was haunted by an eternal chess game in which God moves the player and he the piece. What God behind God originates the scheme? Dios mueve el jugador y este la pieza. Que Dios detrás de Dios, la trama empieza. I play solo on the white page. Languages mold my thoughts and feelings. My father placed blessed medals in the foundations of our home in Heliopolis. He made sure to add Kharaza Zarqa in its 4 corners. Invisible blue eyes watched over our sleep, but kept him safe only for a few years. Were they asleep when he was on his deathbed? Spells and amulets covered vaults and coffins to ensure Egyptians a safe crossing to their last voyage, oftentimes in couples. Beatrice guided Dante towards his paradiso's higher spheres within the folds of a rose of light. Will love keep hearts pure and light? In which sort of paradise did my parents reunite? Is illicit love a sacrilege in the hereafter? In Thebes, Hatshepsut designed a tunnel between her burial chamber and her advisor Senenmut, with his name carved on her mortuary temple walls. Was she hoping they'd enjoy together eternal breeze? Liquid words swallowed phantom limbs, awaken lust for a lost body. I'm sorry, I'm out of the meeting. I don't know if...
No, you're still with us, Hadi.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
I don't know if you heard me. There is another section, which, I mean, this section has another part, but I don't want to extend my time, so I stopped at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just beautiful, as always.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, Gottfried?
Thank you. Call of the Wild, or Messengers. Woke from a dream this afternoon, uncertain, difficult to grasp, to remember what had really happened. It is my feeling that most distinctly stays with me. I'm in a room which has a balcony outside. Through the glass doors opening out to it, yet closed right now, and to the left, I see a large bird that has landed on its balustrade. Strange and unknown, this creature, never ever seen before. And then, it ducks its head just a bit, stretches it slightly forward, and through its wide open beak emits a penetratingly loud call that seems to have no end at all. Yet when it does, finally, is there another then? To my right inside, there is a tame bird on a perch. Have you ever seen the rainbow's iridescence on an otherwise grey pigeon's throat and neck? That one now responds to that wild call outside with a resounding, clamorous one of its own, never ever heard by me before. Slightly to its right, somewhat closer to me in the room, there is yet another bird, one that has never ever made any sound at all. But now it joins the other ones with a call almost their equal, piercing, echoing, and going on as if forever. In shock, surprise, I clasp my hand across my mouth to stop myself from crying out myself, from crying out in tears that easily could rain down without an end. Many years ago, so many years I'm almost not quite certain did this really happen once upon a time. I lived at home. My older brother, who just died weeks ago, had a shepherd's dog. And one day, in the middle of a sunny day, there was a siren. Nothing dramatic, just a kind of testing every Saturday at noon. But this time, his dog responded with a wailing of her own, a wailing such as to, in an instant, change the world. Right there and then, the bright sunny summer's day all of a sudden became a cold and frosty night, almost as if never ending in a bleak, endlessly stretching treeless steppe, flat, where a lonely wolf was howling at the moon. I wake up to know there is light, that is beauty, which is love. I know that I am, and that God is. The light pours out of me, myself, and I. And then I feel invisibly, yet palpably, my brother's hand alighting on my left shoulder, and I know that I will never be alone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gottfried. Good.
Thank you so
Feel
much.
it and see it and everything. Wonderful.
Bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gottfried.
Thank you.
Right. Raymond.
Wow. 2 poems, and I'll say something about the second before I read it. The first poem is titled "The Emptiness Where Everything," and it's kind of part of the poem, so I'm just going to read it again. The emptiness where everything resides, not sleeps, not lives, but dreams. The place of no sound where notes sleep, where nothing yet is, but just seems. The cave where images we keep. Empty with possibility, full of nothing that can be seen, no hints of probability, full of everything that might mean. Something of nourishing value, like a mountain or a river, or a temple or a statue, something that might send a shiver down or up or around your spine, so you knew it was authentic, a cloth fashioned from golden twine. Nothing false, nothing pathetic, never inconsequential, trivial, toxic, or insane, but like river mist, substantial, a bough of spruce through window pane. Clear as all emptiness must be, where all our mystery abides, until the sun touches this tree and we know where our soul abides. The second poem, I knew I was going to read today, and I did not know it would have such a relationship to what we talk about. So the synchronicity is at work. Throughout the whole talk, I was thinking the person herself is a group in some way. And so group dynamics in some way is a way of becoming aware of all the different dynamics of the individual person. And this is a poem I've written recently, July 6th, and it speaks to this issue. The title is I Am All I Have Always Been. Sometimes I wake up as a coach. I'm in the coach's office, packing up the medical kit, making sure I have enough tape. This morning, I woke in my room and I was a child once again, searching the bed for my green cat, taken because he was too worn. Sometimes I'm in the classroom reading all the parts of Hamlet during a raging thunderstorm as rain cascades down the windows. At the command, I set my hands on the white lime of the start line, dig my spikes into the cinders, waiting for the sound of the gun. Often I wake in amazement, for everything I have done has been kept for me to recall. Not a single moment was lost. Sometimes I'm reading Wordsworth. I am on a beach with Chloe, or on a steep climb up Long's Peak. Twice I woke on my wedding day. Each night when you drift off to sleep, you will wander throughout your life. How could so much have taken place that only you can remember? One morning I was a scholar reading in Radcliffe Camera and eating in a dining hall that was built in 1420. I am in a rowboat in Maine, fishing a sunset-stained lake when a largemouth bass hits my lure and jumps 2 feet into the air. Our waking life is just a dream, our days and nights like some fable that could never be believed, except asleep we remember everything, everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. That was great. Perfect pairing with the session, definitely. Right, and then I saw in the chat that Lisa, you'd like to share? If Lisa is still with us.
I'm still here. I hadn't planned to read before. I hadn't known it was a thing, but then I thought I would. So if there's time, I will. If there's not, I will wait.
Great. Now you have 5 minutes.
Okay. I keep reminding myself we are whole. We are whole. We are divine beings with the potential to be gods or devils, angels or demons, and it's not even either or. We see our gods as loving and demanding love, praise, and honor. We demand that others give it. We crave the same. When others thwart us, we go mad and take and demand what we want. We punish those who withhold the love, praise, and gratification of our desires. Some of us, and all of us sometimes, indulge our demonic impulses to hurt and harm without regard for the pain it causes others, in order to relieve us of some of our own. Some of us do it without awareness, some of us with willful ignorance, refusing to see what is clear right there in front of us. It comes from a desire to be loved, seen, adored as we are. Who do we ask to carry the split off parts of ourselves that don't fit? We say only God can take or give life, and yet we make it with our coupling and we take it with our guns. God's running amok. I used to think the Greeks, Romans, and Indians anthropomorphized God, but lately I think they've got it right. We are the many making the one. We are the powerful in the lives of ourselves and each other. We can bring light and good or harm. I see the fallen angels running countries increasingly around the world, making personal fiefdoms at war with others, personal glorification to the one, enrichment to a subgroup of supporters, and denial or death to all the others. We cluster around light beings wanting to be in the circle of their shining, and we forget what we learn the examples of Christ and his cousin Lucifer, confusing one for the other just because we have chosen him to ally with. The one we have chosen is the good one and the bad is the other. As is apparent around the world, we are about evenly split, 50%, making us ready positioned to recreate the battle on the field of Kurukshetra, teacher, brother, father against cousin, or until all are gone in this form. The teachings of the Dharma are to learn this lesson and not repeating it, and yet we repeat it once again.
Thank you, Lisa. Really feel the gods, heroes, and groups coming through in all of these.
Yeah, I thought I would read it, and then I thought, well, maybe it'll fit in some degree. We talked about projection, so there's some projection there.
Yeah. So I think we have time for one more if anybody else wants to share. And if not, we'll sign off for this week. So. Last call. Rula, did you want to share anything?
Well, I wasn't planning on it, but I have a really short poem that was recently published in the Cider Press Review. I actually shared it on my Instagram today, so it's a very, very small poem, and it's called Shards of Tears. I now understand the things I've always known, that glass may burst into shards of scathing sobs, but boulders and fortresses show how unbreakable land is, where pillars of Adonis, Jupiter, and Azizos stand stiffening patiently, like unread books on a shelf. We are matchboxes, charged with decades worth of unignited wishes. Like the rubble of crystal tears left in the sun, we burn to summon those wings among exhaling embers. And those, of course, are the wings of the phoenix, a very much needed image these days.
Beautiful.
So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Sarah. Thank you, Gottfried, Hedy, Lisa, Ray, Adon, Brandt, all of you who are here, all of you who contributed in making this a very wonderful session. So we look forward to seeing you all again very soon, and hopefully some of you can join us next week. So keep those poems coming.
Thank you all.
Rula, do we have to let you know if we want to read next week, or we just show up?
Well, so I take it that you do want to read next week. So I'll have your name down. Yes.